Have you ever wondered what event drastically shifted the course of English history in the 14th century? It was none other than the arrival of the plague, an event that would forever change the face of England. In the year 1346, a malevolent force made its way to England from the distant lands of Central Asia. This force was not an invading army or a powerful king, but a microscopic organism carried within the fleas that infested the black rats. These rats, stowaways on merchant ships, unknowingly ferried this deadly disease across vast oceans and continents. The plague, also known as the Black Death, found a fertile breeding ground in the bustling towns and cities of England. High population density and poor sanitation created the perfect conditions for this devastating disease to spread. The plague was not picky, it did not discriminate, it struck down the rich and the poor, the young and the old, the noble and the peasant. As the plague took hold, it moved at a terrifying pace. The fleas, biting and feeding on the blood of their rat hosts, would jump to humans when given the opportunity. From human to human, the plague was then transmitted, spreading like wildfire through crowded city streets and marketplaces. The people of England had never seen such a disease. It was relentless, it was ruthless, and it seemed to have a cruel sense of irony. The more people tried to come together to combat it, the faster it spread. The very fabric of society seemed to unravel as the plague continued its deadly march across the country. The plague didn't just bring death, it brought fear, it brought chaos, and it brought change. The world before the plague was not the world after the plague. This was not just an epidemic, it was a turning point, a moment in history that would forever alter the course of England and the world. The arrival of the plague, the most devastating pandemic in human history, marked the beginning of a tragic era for England. So how did this deadly disease spread across England, and what was its immediate impact? The Black Death, as it was later known, spread like wildfire across England. It began in the bustling ports, brought over by fleas on black rats that stowed away on merchant ships. From there it infiltrated towns and cities, and then into the countryside carried by people and animals alike. The disease was no respecter of boundaries, cutting across social and geographical lines with ruthless efficiency. In the urban areas, the close living quarters and poor sanitation provided the perfect breeding ground for the plague. The disease spread rapidly through the narrow, crowded streets, leaving few untouched. The rural areas, although initially spared due to their isolation, eventually fell victim too. Farmers, shepherds, and entire villages were wiped out, their fields and flocks left untended. The immediate impact of the plague was astounding. The death rate soared, with estimates suggesting that between a third and half of England's population perished in the first wave alone. The sheer number of deaths was a tragedy in itself, but the speed at which it happened was equally devastating. People were dying faster than they could be buried, leading to mass graves and a breakdown of traditional burial rites. The social order too began to crumble under the strain. The plague didn't discriminate between rich and poor, noble and peasant, clergy and laymen. The fear of catching the disease led to panic and chaos, with people abandoning their homes, families, and responsibilities in a desperate attempt to escape. The streets were filled with the sick and dying while the healthy hid away in fear. And then there was the psychological impact. The sight of so many deaths, the smell of rotting bodies, the constant fear of catching the disease. It was a time of great terror and confusion. People didn't understand why this was happening or how to stop it. They were helpless in the face of such a deadly, invisible enemy. In just a few months, the plague had spread across the entire country, leaving death and chaos in its wake. But what were the long-term effects of the plague on England's society and economy? A fascinating question indeed. Let's delve into the aftermath of this catastrophic event and its far-reaching consequences. In the wake of the plague's devastation, England's population was dramatically reduced. This led to an unexpected outcome, a significant labor shortage. As the labor force dwindled, those who were left gained an unexpected bargaining chip. Workers could now demand higher wages and better working conditions. This shift was a turning point, leading to increased social mobility for the lower classes, a phenomenon previously unheard of in the rigid social structure of the times. The labor shortage also gave rise to a new social class, the yeoman class. These were small landowners, who, in the absence of the traditional workforce, stepped in to fill the gap. They began to cultivate their own lands, a task previously undertaken by serfs. Their newfound independence and economic power led to the rise of this class as a notable force in England's social and economic fabric. Simultaneously, the feudal system, which had been the backbone of England's economy and society, began to crumble under these changes. The plague had unwittingly become a catalyst for systemic change. The lords of the manor, who once held absolute power, found themselves grappling with a new reality. Their traditional workforce was either gone or demanding more rights, and their lands were being cultivated by the rising yeoman class. This marked a significant shift in power dynamics, resulting in the gradual decline of feudalism. In the grand scheme of things, the plague's impact went beyond the immediate loss and devastation. It triggered a ripple effect of social and economic changes, some of which shaped the course of England's history. It's a stark reminder of how even the darkest of times can give rise to transformative changes and unexpected shifts in societal structure and economic systems. The plague not only caused immediate devastation but also triggered significant socio-economic changes. How did the plague influence the cultural and religious beliefs of the people? The plague's arrival in England in 1346 was more than a public health crisis. It was a cultural and religious upheaval that shook the very foundations of society. It significantly transformed the landscape of beliefs and cultural expressions, leaving a lasting imprint on the psyche of the people. In the face of such inexplicable suffering, many turned towards mysticism for answers. A group known as the Flagellants emerged, who believed that the plague was God's punishment for humanity's sins. They roamed the streets, whipping themselves in public penance, hoping to appease divine wrath. Their extreme acts of self-mortification were a manifestation of the desperation and fear that gripped society. The plague also ignited a wave of persecution against those seen as others. Jews and lepers were scapegoated and blamed for the spread of the disease. This persecution was not merely a reaction to the fear of contagion. It was a manifestation of societal anxieties and prejudices that the plague brought to the surface. The Church, which had been the bedrock of medieval society, found its authority questioned. The clergy's inability to provide solace or halt the spread of the plague led to disillusionment. Some began to question the Church's teachings, sowing the seeds for the later religious upheavals of the Reformation. Art and literature too bore the imprint of the plague. The macabre dance of death became a common theme, reflecting society's intimate acquaintance with mortality. Literature adopted a more somber tone, exploring themes of loss, suffering, and the fleeting nature of life. The plague's shadow stretched far beyond its time, influencing the cultural expressions of generations to come. The plague left a profound imprint on the cultural and religious fabric of England. It was a catalyst for change, reshaping society in ways that continue to reverberate through history. The plague was not merely a disease, it was a transformative force that profoundly altered the cultural and religious landscape. The plague left a profound imprint on the cultural and religious fabric of England. So, what is the legacy of the plague in England? In the wake of the Black Death, England was a nation transformed. The devastation was immense, but from the ashes, a new England began to rise. The recovery was slow and arduous. The population, which had been decimated, took nearly 2 centuries to return to its pre-plague numbers. As people rebuilt their lives, the economy too eventually regained its footing. The aftermath was not only about recovery but also about change. The plague, in its brutal sweep, had upset the social order. Peasants, who had once been bound to their lords, found themselves in a position to demand better wages and conditions. This shift in power dynamics laid the groundwork for the end of the feudal system and the emergence of a new social order. The plague's legacy, however, extends beyond the social and economic transformations it inspired. Today, we find echoes of this chapter in history in the most unexpected places. Across England, beneath bustling streets and serene parks, lie plague pits. Mass graves where victims were hastily buried in an attempt to control the spread of the disease. These plague pits are chilling reminders of the scale of the devastation. Perhaps the most intriguing part of the plague's legacy lies in our very genes. Some descendants of plague survivors carry a genetic mutation that gives them resistance to HIV, a disease that, much like the plague, has claimed millions of lives. This mutation, known as CCR5 delta 32, is thought to have become common in the population due to the selective pressure of the plague. It's a testament to the resilience and adaptability of the human species, even in the face of such unimaginable adversity. The plague, a catastrophe that once wreaked havoc in England, has left us with enduring reminders of our resilience in the face of adversity. From the social changes it spurred to the genetic legacy it left behind, the plague continues to shape our world in ways both visible and invisible.